The light within the glyptal conclave was a constant, ancient thing, a column of pearlescent energy that had not dimmed in millennia. It fell upon the floating obsidian daises of the assembled delegates, casting long, solemn shadows that seemed to drink the very sound from the immense chamber. Here, silence was a language, a tool of statecraft wielded with more precision than any weapon. And for cycles, the silence concerning the species known as humanity had been absolute, a void carved into galactic politics by the conclave's own decree. But now, that silence was breaking, cracking under a pressure that none had anticipated and fewer still understood. High Arbiter Javoth of the Cathar, his crystalline carapace absorbing the ambient light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny spectra of unease, felt the fracture not as a sound, but as a deep, resonant shudder in the very foundations of the great compact. His multifaceted eyes surveyed the chamber, seeing not his peers, but vessels of deeply ingrained philosophies, each as rigid and unyielding as the celestial mechanics they so revered. On a dais of woven light, the luminous Gestalt shimmered, a being of pure thought and energy that had long been the conclave's moral compass. Its voice, a cascade of harmonious chimes, filled the chamber, each note dripping with a sorrow that was both profound and accusatory. "The quarantine zone flickers," the Gestalt resonated. "The void we placed around the Sol system, the demarcation of their exile, registers anomalies, energy signatures that defy our understanding of physics. They were cast out for their aggression, for their refusal to accept the wisdom of managed retreat in the face of the Vorlag expansion. They chose violence over balance, and now, in their isolation, what new violence have they conceived?" The luminous Gestalt's light pulsed with a cold, fearful luminescence, a stark contrast to its usual warm glow. It saw humanity as a philosophical plague, a chaotic variable that threatened the meticulously calculated equation of galactic peace. Their crime, in the Gestalt's view, was not merely fighting an unwinnable war, but refusing to accept the nobility of sacrifice for the greater good. They had clung to their existence with a ferocity the conclave deemed pathological. Across the chamber, Matron Vexia of the Silkreen shifted her serpentine form upon a heated granite platform. Her scales, the color of polished jade and old gold, rustled like dry leaves. Her interest was not in philosophy, but in consequence. "Anomalies are a concern," she hissed, her forked tongue tasting the sterile air of the chamber. "But the deeper concern is the silence. The Vorlag, whom the humans so foolishly provoked, have also gone silent along that entire frontier. Trade routes that have been dormant for generations are now quiet. Not contested, not destroyed, simply empty. The humans were exiled, but in doing so we ceded a vast territory to their conflict. We have no sensor readings, no trade signals, no refugee transmissions. The entire sector has become a ghost territory, a drain on the galactic economy that grows with every cycle." Her cold, reptilian eyes fixed on Javoth. "Your Cathar arbiters enforce the conclave's will. This quarantine was your design. What say you, Arbiter? Is this the stability you promised?" Javoth did not immediately respond. His mind, a complex lattice of logic and precedent, was replaying the moment of humanity's judgment. He remembered the human ambassador, a female of their species, standing before the conclave not in supplication, but in a state of cold, controlled fury. She had not pleaded for their survival. She had demanded the conclave honor its own charters and defend a member species from unprovoked aggression. She had presented evidence of the Vorlag's true nature, not as expansionists but as consumers, a locust swarm that devoured entire star systems, leaving behind nothing but gravitational scars and fading radiation. The conclave, in its ancient wisdom, had seen the cost of intervention as too high. The Vorlag were too numerous, their territory too vast. The Great Compact, a doctrine born from the ashes of a cataclysmic war eons ago, dictated that stability must be preserved at any cost. Sometimes that cost was a species. A limb would be sacrificed to save the body. The humans were told to cede their colonies, to retreat, to give the Vorlag what they wanted in the hopes that their hunger would be sated. The humans had refused. They had not just refused, they had countered the Vorlag with a ferocity that had stunned the galaxy. They had developed weapons in a single generation that had taken other species centuries to theorize. Their retreat had stopped. They had held a line, and for this ultimate act of defiance against the Conclave's mandate, they were branded aggressors, exiled, encased in a sensor-proof quarantine zone, a cosmic shunning left to their fate. The Conclave had washed its hands of them, confident that the Vorlag would eventually overwhelm them, and the unfortunate human variable would be erased from the galactic equation. But that had not happened. The silence that followed was not the silence of annihilation. It was something else, something heavy and watchful. The quarantine was enacted to prevent the spread of humanity's chaotic philosophy of total war, Javoth finally stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried the weight of his office. His mandibles clicked softly, a subconscious habit when processing deep uncertainty. It was designed to contain a threat to the Great Compact. The current anomalies suggest an unforeseen outcome. The energy signatures are not of weapons fire. They are vast, stable, and geometrically perfect. They are the signatures of creation, not destruction. He paused, letting the implications settle in the silent chamber. We judged humanity for their refusal to die quietly. We named their survival instinct aggression. We feared their capacity for rapid, violent adaptation. Perhaps we should have been more concerned with what they might do with that capacity when left entirely to their own devices, with their backs against the wall of their own sun. The luminous gestalt flared. Creation, they are creating new ways to kill Arbiter, new methods of asserting their will upon the universe. That is the human way. They do not seek balance, they seek dominion. Their exile was a mercy. It allowed them to perish on their own terms without staining the rest of the galaxy with their struggle. And if they have not perished, Matron Vexia interjected, her voice sharp, if instead they have prospered, what then? An exiled, powerful, and resentful species sitting on a resource-rich sector they now control absolutely. That is not stability. That is a future war waiting for a spark. Javoth felt the truth of both their statements, yet neither felt complete. He had studied the human archives before the judgment. He had seen their art, read their philosophy. They were a species of profound contradictions. They spoke of peace while perfecting war. They dreamed of unity while living in a constant state of internal conflict. They were simultaneously the most compassionate and the most ruthless species the Conclave had ever encountered. To label them as simple aggressors had felt like an incomplete diagnosis then, and it felt like a catastrophic misjudgment now. The Conclave, in its rigid adherence to ancient law, had failed to account for the one variable that drove all mortal life, the will to endure. Humanity did not just possess that will, they had weaponized it. A delegation must be sent, Javoth declared, his words solidifying the fear in the room into a concrete plan. A single vessel, an arbiter's ship, to observe, to understand. We are operating from a foundation of ignorance and old prejudices. We passed a sentence based on a prediction, and that prediction has failed to materialize. The unknown is a greater threat to stability than any known adversary. I will lead this delegation myself. The luminous gestalt dimmed to a sullen violet. You would break the quarantine, you would risk contact, their chaos may be infectious. Our ignorance is the greater infection, Javoth countered, his voice resonating with a finality that permitted no further argument. We shrouded them in darkness, and now we fear what has grown in it. It is time to turn on the light. The column of energy in the center of the chamber seemed to brighten for a moment, as if in agreement. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer the silence of resolved judgment. It was the silence of profound, galactic trepidation. The silence before a storm that had been gathering for generations, just beyond the horizon of their understanding. Javoth felt the weight of his task settle upon his carapace, a burden heavier than any armor. He was not just going to investigate an anomaly. He was going to face the ghost of the Conclave's greatest failure, and he did not know if it would offer a hand in understanding or a blade to their collective throat. The journey to the edge of the former quarantine zone was a voyage through ghosts. They passed through star systems that were once thriving hubs of commerce and culture, now silent and dark. These were the worlds the Conclave had ordered evacuated, the buffer zones ceded to the Vorlag. Javoth's ship, the Stellar Balance, moved through the emptiness like a phantom, its advanced sensors sweeping the void, finding nothing. No debris, no radiation signatures of past battles. No faint distress calls echoing across the decades. There was only a profound and unsettling stillness, a cosmic tidiness that was more unnerving than any wreckage. It was as if this entire arm of the galaxy had been wiped clean, not by violence, but by a meticulous, unseen hand. As they approached the coordinates of the quarantine border, the ship's chief science officer, a younger Cathar named Talon, reported the first sensor contacts. Arbiter, he chimed, his tone a mixture of awe and confusion. We are detecting the energy signatures. They are incomprehensible. They are not point sources. They seem to be woven into the fabric of space-time itself. There are gravitational fluctuations that should not be possible. The laws of physics out here are compliant. Ordered. Javoth stood on the bridge, his multifaceted eyes looking at the main view screen. It showed nothing but the stardusted black of empty space. There were no walls, no weapon platforms, no warning buoys. The border was invisible, yet his ship systems were screaming that it was there. "Explain, ordered," Javoth commanded, his voice low. "The background radiation is perfectly uniform," Talon reported, his analytical mind struggling to process the data. "The quantum foam is placid. It's as if the inherent randomness of the universe has been smoothed over. This isn't a shield or a fence, Arbiter. It is a fundamental alteration of reality, a zone of absolute causality." Before Javoth could contemplate the terrifying implications of such a technology, a signal came through. It was not a broad-spectrum hail, but a tightly focused, needle-thin beam of communication that pierced their shields and delivered its message directly to their central computer. It was clean, simple, and broadcast in flawless, unaccented Cathar standard. The voice was calm, female, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Stellar balance. This is human diplomatic vessel Solace. High Arbiter Javoth, we have been expecting you. You are cleared for approach to the designated coordinates. Welcome to the Sol Dominion." The silence on the bridge was absolute. The word Dominion hung in the air, heavy and menacing. It confirmed the luminous Gestalt's worst fears. They had not just survived, they had built an empire in their exile, and they had been expecting him. Javoth felt a coldness seep into his crystalline form. This was not a mission of observation. It was a summons. He had thought he was the one extending a hand into the darkness, but the darkness had been waiting for him all along. "Acknowledge the signal," he commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty he felt within. "Inform them we are proceeding to the designated coordinates." As the stellar balance crossed the invisible line, the universe outside the viewscreen changed. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the way starlight refracted, a sharpening of distant nebulae. But as they moved deeper into human space, the scale of what they had built became terrifyingly apparent. They were not seeing fleets of warships. They were seeing things that had no name in the Conclave's lexicon. Around a brilliant blue giant star, a ring of silvery material tens of millions of kilometers in diameter spun slowly, not in orbit, but held in place by forces that defied gravity. It was siphoning plasma from the star's corona in vast, controlled tendrils of light, channeling the energy into structures that shimmered at the edge of perception. Further on, a gas giant was encased in a latticework of light, its stormy atmosphere being harvested and processed on a planetary scale. This was not industry as the Conclave knew it. This was celestial engineering. They were not living in their star system, they were rewriting it. The diplomatic vessel Solace was waiting for them at the coordinates. It was a small ship by Conclave standards, a simple, elegant spire of white and gray, with no visible weapon emplacements. It guided them towards a structure that dwarfed everything else they had seen, a perfect sphere of black, featureless material that seemed to drink the light of the nearby star. An opening dilated on its surface, a perfect circle of light, and the stellar balance was drawn inside. The interior was a vast, open space, the walls glowing with a soft, indirect light. There was no clutter, no visible machinery. It was a place of profound and intimidating minimalism. A transport vessel detached from the Solace and docked with their ship. A single figure emerged into their airlock. A human female, dressed in a simple dark gray uniform that bore no rank or insignia. She was flanked by two silent, armored figures that moved with an unnatural grace, their forms humanoid but strangely elongated. Javoth and his contingent met them in the primary receiving bay. "High Arbiter Javoth," the woman said, her voice the same one from the transmission. It was even more unnerving in person, calm, measured, and radiating an aura of absolute confidence. "I am Ambassador Evelyn Reed. On behalf of the Sol Dominion, I welcome you." "Ambassador," Javoth replied, his formal tone a shield for his swirling thoughts. "Your use of the word Dominion has caused concern within the Conclave. It implies conquest, expansion." Evelyn Reed offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of warmth, but of deep, weary understanding. "Concern is a natural reaction to the unknown, Arbiter. We understand that, but you misunderstand the nature of our dominion. We have not conquered a single world that was not already ours. We have not subjugated a single sentient being. Our dominion is not over peoples or territories. It is over the principles that govern existence." She gestured towards the featureless walls of the sphere. "Please walk with me. We have much to discuss." She led them through silent, cathedral-like corridors to an observation chamber. One entire wall was a transparent pane looking out not into space, but into a swirling vortex of light and color, a contained storm of raw energy. It was a naked singularity, a captive black hole, stripped of its event horizon and used as a power source. Javoth's scientific knowledge screamed that this was impossible, a violation of a dozen fundamental laws. "You exiled us for refusing to retreat," Reed began, her back to him as she gazed into the impossible sight. "You called it aggression. We called it survival. The Vorlag were not a conventional empire. They did not seek territory. They consumed energy. They fed on stars, triggering novas to crack open planetary cores for the heavy elements within. Your managed retreat was a death sentence, not just for us, but for every system in their path. The Great Compact demanded we sacrifice ourselves to appease a force that could not be appeased. It was a flawed doctrine, born of fear. The Compact has maintained peace for eons," Javoth countered, his voice tight. "It prevents galaxy-spanning wars." "It maintains stagnation," Reed corrected, turning to face him. Her eyes were a pale blue, and they held a depth that seemed as ancient as the conclave itself. "It prevents growth. It sacrifices the future to preserve the past. When you cast us out, you left us with a simple, binary choice: perish or evolve. We were a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself. We turned that energy, that relentless drive for conflict and resolution, outward, not against the conclave. Not even against the Vorlag. We turned it against the limitations of reality itself." She raised a hand, and the transparent wall shimmered. The image of the singularity was replaced by a tactical display that made Javoth's mind reel. It showed the entire sector that had once been the quarantine zone. It was covered in a complex, interlocking grid of energy. "This is the Dominion," she said. "We did not build fleets. We built anchors, devices that stabilize causality. Within this space, we can dictate physical constants. We can increase the strong nuclear force to render fission-based weapons inert. We can dampen gravitational waves to make faster-than-light travel impossible for ships not broadcasting the correct resonance key. We did not defeat the Vorlag with ships and guns. We simply changed the rules of the universe in their territory until their star-consuming technology could no longer function. This was the great reveal. This was the source of the impossible energy signatures. It was not a new weapon. It was a new science, a new philosophy of existence. They hadn't built a bigger sword. They had rewritten the laws of metallurgy to make their enemies' blades turn to dust. It was a power so absolute, so fundamental, that it made the Conclave's entire military and political structure seem like the squabbling of children in a sandbox. What did you do with the Vorlag?" Javoth asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Conclave had feared a genocide. Reed's expression became somber. "That was our greatest moral test, to become the monsters we fought or to find another way. We chose another way." The display shifted again, focusing on a single point of absolute blackness in the center of the former Vorlag territory. "We could not allow them to continue their path of destruction, but we could not justify extinguishing a sentient species, no matter how monstrous. So we created a pocket universe, a space-time bubble with altered temporal flow. We gathered every last one of them, their ships, their worlds, and placed them inside. In that place, time flows at a fraction of a percent of our own. They have an entire universe to themselves, with stars that will burn for trillions of years. They can live out their entire history from beginning to end without ever harming another living thing in our reality. They are not destroyed. They are contained. Their aggression has been rendered irrelevant." Javoth stared at the display, at the quiet, elegant, and terrifyingly absolute solution the humans had devised. The Conclave had feared their barbarism, their unrestrained aggression. But the truth was infinitely more unnerving. In their exile, humanity had achieved a level of technological and ethical sophistication that was beyond the Conclave's wildest imagination. They had been given a death sentence, and they had responded by becoming gods. They had not chosen retreat. They had not chosen domination in the way the galaxy understood it. They had chosen to become the masters of their own fate, on a level so profound it shook Javoth to his very core. He looked at Evelyn Reed, at this calm, quiet representative of a species they had condemned, and for the first time in his long life, the high arbiter of the Glyptal Conclave felt the chilling, humbling sensation of true, unadulterated awe. He had come here expecting to meet resentful savages. Instead, he had found the architects of a new reality. The return journey to the Conclave's capital was conducted in a silence that was deeper and more contemplative than the void outside the stellar balance. Javoth had the full data packet from Ambassador Reed, the scientific principles of the reality anchors, the historical records of the Vorlag War from the human perspective, and the complete, unedited logs of the Vorlag's containment. It was a truth so overwhelming that it had taken his crew cycles to fully process, to accept that what they had witnessed was not a trick, but a new paradigm of existence. Javath had spent the entire transit in his meditation chamber, his crystalline mind replaying his conversation with Reed, her calm, unyielding logic dismantling a millennium of his most deeply held beliefs. The Great Compact was not a shield, it was a cage. The Conclave's peace was not stability, it was a slow, managed decay. Humanity's exile was not a punishment. It had been a catalyst, a crucible that had burned away their flaws and forged them into something new, something necessary. He arrived back in the Great Chamber not as an arbiter returning with a report, but as a messenger carrying a revelation that would either save the galaxy or shatter it. The assembled delegates floated on their daises, their forms radiating impatience and anxiety. The luminous gestalt shimmered with a harsh, interrogative light. Matron Vexia's serpentine coils were wound tight with tension. Javath took his place on the Cathar platform, the ancient stone cool beneath him, a stark contrast to the fire of purpose that now burned within him. "You have returned, Arbiter," the Gestalt chimed, its tone lacking its usual harmony. "You have broken the quarantine. You have communed with the chaotic ones. What report do you bring of their aggression? What new weapons have they forged in their rage?" Javath activated the central display, not with his own ship's sensor logs, but with the data given to him by Evelyn Reed. He projected the image of the human dominion, the intricate, impossible web of causality anchors, the harnessed stars, the tamed singularity. The chamber was filled with the soft gasp of 100 different respiratory systems. "You ask what weapons they have forged," Javath began, his voice echoing with a newfound gravity. "They have forged no weapons. They have forged a new physics. You speak of their aggression. Their aggression was the desperate defense of a people you condemned to extinction. You speak of chaos. I have witnessed an order so profound it makes our Great Compact look like the random scrawling of a frightened child." He laid it all bare. He showed them the true nature of the Vorlag, the Star Eaters. He played the human records of planets cracking open, of suns dying prematurely. He then showed them the human solution, the elegant, terrifying containment of an entire species within a pocket universe. The moral and technological leap was so immense, so far beyond the Conclave's own capabilities, that a wave of disbelief and horror washed through the chamber. The luminous Gestalt flared violently. "This is a trick, a deception. This power is an abomination. They have tampered with the sacred laws of the universe. This is the ultimate chaos, to rewrite reality to suit one's own will. They are not saviors. They are monsters of a new and terrible kind." "They are what we forced them to be," Javath thundered, his voice cracking like fracturing crystal, a display of emotion unheard of from a Cathar arbiter. "We left them no other path. We offered them only death, and they refused to take it. We feared their small wars, and in our ignorance we drove them to become masters of creation itself. We sit in this chamber, debating the minutiae of ancient laws, while a species we deemed unworthy has solved problems we did not even have the vocabulary to describe. The Sol Dominion is not a threat to us. It is a judgment. It is a reflection of our own failure, our own cowardice, our own stagnation." Matron Vexia, ever the pragmatist, saw a different angle. "This technology," she hissed, her eyes fixed on the image of the harnessed star. "The ability to control causality, to generate limitless energy, the economic implications are absolute. A species with such power has no need for trade. They have no need for allies. They have no need for us at all. They could erase us from existence with a thought, simply by altering the physical laws that allow our biologies to function." The fear of annihilation was now replaced by the fear of utter irrelevance. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of debate, of fear, of accusation. The old order was dying right there in the ancient hall, strangled by a truth it could not accept. Javath stood silent, letting the chaos wash over him. He had delivered the message. He had planted the seed of a new and terrible understanding. The Conclave had to choose, to cling to its crumbling doctrines and view humanity as a monstrous threat, or to embrace the humbling truth that they were no longer the most advanced power in the galaxy. It was in that moment of supreme crisis that a new alert klaxon sounded, a priority one signal that overrode all debate and silenced the chamber in an instant. It was a code that had not been used in Javath's lifetime, a signal from the deep-range observatories stationed at the very edge of the galactic disk. A frantic, terrified voice from a Zalosian astronomer crackled through the chamber's speakers. "Conclave command, we have confirmation from multiple arrays. A wave affront. Nothing, it is moving at near-light speed from the intergalactic void. It is not a fleet. It is not an energy weapon. It is a wave of ontological decay. Where it passes, physical laws break down. Matter ceases to have meaning. It is dissolving everything. The Andromeda galaxy has already gone dark. It's not a conqueror. It's an ending, a universal constant of dissolution. It will be here in less than a standard century. A cold dread, far deeper and more final than any fear of humanity, settled over the chamber. This was not a problem that could be solved by treaties or managed retreats. This was not an enemy that could be appeased or fought. It was a fundamental force of the universe, a cosmic disease, the great filter made manifest not as a rival civilization, but as the universe simply ending. All their debates, all their laws, all their power meant nothing. They were standing on a shore, watching a tsunami the size of a galaxy approach, and they had no arc. As the assembled delegates stared in mute horror at the tactical display, which now showed a spreading stain of absolute blackness eating its way through the star charts of their neighboring galaxy, a new image materialized in the center of the chamber. It was Ambassador Evelyn Reed, her face as calm and composed as it had been in the observation sphere of the Dominion. She was not a hologram. Her presence felt solid, real, as if she were projecting her very consciousness across the light years. Her voice, quiet and clear, cut through the terrified silence. "We know," she said, and those two words carried the weight of a burden unimaginable. "We have known for some time. The energy signatures your observatories are just now detecting. We have been tracking them since our exile began. This phenomenon, this entropic cascade, is why we built the Dominion." The final, universe-spanning piece of the puzzle clicked into place in Javoth's mind. The harnessed stars, the causality anchors, the mastery of spacetime. It was never about the Vorlag. The Vorlag were just a catalyst, a training exercise. It was never about the Conclave. The Conclave was an irrelevance. Humanity had been preparing for a war not against a species, but against reality itself. "Our refusal to retreat was not born of pride," Reed continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the delegates. "It was born of necessity. We saw this coming. We knew that the only way to survive it was to stop running, to master the very laws that were beginning to unravel. The Dominion is not an empire. It is a lifeboat. It is a shield not against ships, but against the end of all things. Its causality anchors can create a bubble of stable reality, a sanctuary where existence can continue, even when the universe outside dissolves into nothing." She looked directly at Javoth, her expression not one of triumph or pity, but of a shared, solemn purpose. "The Glyptal Conclave exiled us. You cast us out for fighting for our future, but the universe does not care for politics. Your great compact has left you philosophically and technologically bankrupt, unable to face the true and final threat. Our Dominion can shield this sector. It can preserve the memory and the life of every species in this conclave." A profound and heavy silence fell. The arrogance of the conclave, the millennia of certainty, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, primal fear of non-existence. They had misjudged humanity on every conceivable level. They had mistaken desperation for aggression, evolution for chaos, and preparation for a cosmic apocalypse as a petty grab for power. "We chose no more retreat," Ambassador Reed stated, her voice resonating with the finality of a law of nature. "Now you must choose. Will you retreat from reality itself, clinging to your broken doctrines as the darkness takes you? Or will you stand with us, in the shelter we built from our pain, our anger, and our unyielding will to see the next dawn?" Javoth looked from the terrifying map of the encroaching universal decay to the calm, determined face of the human ambassador. He finally understood. The exile had been a gift. It had unshackled humanity from the conclave's stagnation and forced them to become what the galaxy now desperately needed. Not guardians of the past, but architects of the future. Their so-called domination was never about ruling others. It was about achieving dominion over despair, over entropy, over the finality of death itself. They were not aggressors, they were saviors, and in a final, humbling act of grace, they were offering to save the very people who had condemned them. Javoth slowly inclined his head, a gesture of profound respect from one of the oldest beings in the galaxy to a representative of its youngest and most powerful hope. The choice was clear. There was no more retreat. There was only unity or utter annihilation. And in the face of the oncoming night, humanity stood as the galaxy's only, and perhaps its last, burning star.